Welcome to another lesson from the great book of Masnavi by Rumi. When the enemy comes as a friend, the lessons from Rumi's story of the Jewish king and the cunning vazir. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the one who attacks us openly. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who comes close, speaks softly, gains our trust, and then divides us from within. Rumi teaches this powerful truth in one of the important stories of the Masnavi, the story of the Jewish king, a cunning vizier, and a divided Christian community. Before we begin, it is important to say this clearly. Rumi is not telling the story to attack Judaism or Christianity. In the Masnavi, stories are not only historical events, they are mirrors. Rumi uses characters to show spiritual truth. The king can represent hatred and blind power. The vizier can represent deception, false leadership, and the ego. And a divided community can represent any group of people who lose unity because they follow appearances instead of truth. Rumi opens the story with these lines. بود شاهی در جهودان ظلم ساز دشمن عیسی و نصرانی گداز عهد عیسی بود و نوبت آن او جان موسی او و موسی جان او. There was once a king among the Jews, a maker of oppression, an enemy of Jesus, one who burned the Christians. It was the time of Jesus, and his turn had come. The soul of Moses was one with him. The Moses was one with his soul. These lines are very important. Rumi begins with conflict, but immediately reminds us that Moses and Jesus are not enemies in truth. Their spirits are united. Their message comes from the same divine source. The problem is not Moses. The problem is not Jesus. The problem is the narrow human mind that turns religion into separation. Rumi then gives a beautiful image of a distorted vision. شاه احول کرد در راه خدا آن دو دمساز خدایی را جدا گفت استاد احولی را کنده را رو برون آر از وثاق آن شیشه را گفت احول زان دو شیشه من کدام پیش تو آورم بکن شرح تمام. The cross-eyed king on the path of God separated these two friends of God. A teacher once told a cross-eyed student, "Go inside and bring me that bottle." The student said, "Which of the two bottles should I bring?" Explain it clearly to me. This is one of Rumi's genius moments. The teacher sees one bottle. The cross-eyed student sees two. In the same way, the truth is one, but a distorted eye sees division. Rumi is saying that the problem is often not in reality itself. The problem is in our way of seeing. When the eye of the heart is sick, unity looks like conflict. When the mind is distorted, one truth appears as many enemies. When ego enters religion, even prophets become divided in the imagination of people. This is the first major lesson of the story. False vision creates false division. The Jewish king in the story hates the Christians and wants to destroy them, but his vizier understands something very important. Open violence does not always destroy faith. In fact, sometimes persecution makes faith stronger. When people suffer from what they believe, their belief becomes deeper. So the vizier proposes a dark plan. He tells the king, in effect, "Do not fight them only from the outside. Let me enter their community from the inside." This is where the story becomes deeply psychological. The vizier asks the king to pretend to punish him. He wants to appear as a victim. He wants the Christians to believe that he has suffered because he secretly followed their faith. So the king tortures him publicly and sends him away. The vizier then goes to the Christians with wounds on his body and lies on his tongue. The Christians see him and believe him. They think, "This man has suffered for us. He must be sincere. He must be one of us." And here Rumi gives us a serious warning. Appearance is not always truth. A wound does not always prove sincerity. Tears do not always prove purity. Soft words do not always prove wisdom. And religious language does not always prove closeness to God. The vizier gains their trust. Then he gains respect. Then he becomes a spiritual authority among them. And once he has their trust, he begins his real work, division. He gives different teaching to different groups. He tells one group one thing and another group the opposite. He creates separate instructions, separate claims, and separate identities. Each group begins to believe that it alone has the truth. This is the second lesson of the story. A community can survive outside pressure, but it may collapse when it loses inner unity. The vizier does not need to kill them. He only needs to make them suspicious of one another. He only needs to make each group proud of its own interpretation. Once pride enters faith, sacred words can become dangerous. Religion becomes a weapon. Words that should bring people closer to God becomes tools for separation. Rumi's point is not only about religious communities. It's also about families. It's also about friendships. It's about societies. It's about schools, nations, and even the human heart. Any place where trust exists can be poisoned by false guidance. Any group can be weakened when people stop listening to one another. Any heart can be divided when the ego pretends to be a teacher. In the story, after the vizier has planted the seeds of division, he withdraws from the people. He goes into seclusion. The Christian leaders beg him to come out, but he refuses. Then he gives secret instructions to different leaders. Each one believes that he is the true successor. Each one believes that he has received the final truth. After the vizier dies, conflict begins. The community breaks into groups. Each group claims authority. Each group believes the others are wrong. What the king could not achieve through violence, the vizier achieves through deception. This is why the story is so powerful. It shows us that falsehood is most dangerous when it wears clothing of truth. A false guide does not always look false. A manipulator does not always speak harshly. Sometimes he speaks beautifully. Sometimes he uses sacred language. Sometimes he appears humble. Sometimes he even appears wounded. But Rumi asks us to look deeper. At one point in the Masnavi, Rumi moves from the outer story to the inner meaning. He reminds us that the enemy outside is not the only enemy. There is also an enemy inside the human being. نفس و شیطان هر دو یک تن بوده اند. در دو صورت خویش را بنموده اند. The ego and Satan are, in truth, one reality. They have only shown themselves in two different forms. This line takes the story to another level. The vizier is not only a historical character, he is also a symbol of the ego, the nafs, that part of us which is clever, proud, and always looking for control. The ego does not always say, I am your enemy. Often it says, I am helping you. It tells us that our anger is justice. It tells us that our pride is dignity. It tells us that our prejudice is truth. It tells us that our division is loyalty. And slowly, like the vizier, it enters the heart and becomes an advisor. The most dangerous false guide may not be outside us, it may be inside us. Every human being has an inner vizier, a voice that can twist truth for its own purpose, a voice that can use religion, knowledge, emotion, or pain to make us feel superior. Rumi wants us to become aware of that voice before it divides our inner world. Because when the heart becomes divided, the person becomes lost. A divided heart cannot love fully. A divided mind cannot see clearly. A divided soul cannot walk steadily toward truth. This is why sincerity is so important in Rumi's world. For Rumi, truth is not only about correct words, it is about the purity of the heart behind the words. Two people may say the same sentence, but one says it from love and the other from ego. Two people may teach the same idea, but one opens the heart and the other one closes it. Two people may speak about God, but one brings peace and the other brings division. This is why Rumi often teaches us to look at the source, not only the surface. The vazir's words sounded spiritual, but their source was poison. His appearance suggested sacrifice, but his intention was destruction. So the lesson is simple but difficult. Do not confuse appearance with truth. And here we can pause and ask ourselves, who do we trust and why? Do we trust people only because they speak confidently? Do we trust them because they use religious or spiritual language? Do we trust them because they seem wounded, emotional, or passionate? Or do we look for humility, compassion, wisdom, and sincerity? This story is also very relevant today. We live in a world full of voices. Everyday people try to influence us: religious voices, political voices, media voices, social media voices, public speakers, teachers, influencers, and leaders. Some of them truly guide, some of them only divide. A true guide brings people closer to truth or closer to one another. A false guide makes people proud, angry, suspicious, and divided. A true guide reduces the ego. A false guide feeds it. A true guide brings light. A false guide creates fire. Rumi's message is not only be careful of bad people. His message is deeper. Be careful of falsehood when it appears in a beautiful form. Be careful of hatred when it uses the language of faith. Be careful of pride when it uses the language of truth. Be careful of ego when it uses the language of guidance. The story of the Jewish king and the cunning vizier is not just an old religious tale. It is a warning for every age. It warns us about hatred in power. It warns us about manipulation in religious language. It warns us about blind trust. It warns us about division. And most importantly, it warns us about the hidden ego inside ourselves. At the end, the question is not only who was the vizier. The deeper question is, where is the vizier in me? Where do I pretend to seek truth while secretly wanting to be right?